Hello, Max here. Today I just want to talk a little bit about the Victorian state government and how they have used and abused the property sector and how they will continue to do so as a source of revenue. So throughout their 7 years of government since the 2014 election, Premier Daniel Andrews and Treasurer Tim Pallas have spent big off the back of handsome revenue generated in no small part by taxes effectively on the property sector. A housing boom that concentrated in Melbourne from 2014 to 2017 resulted in a boon for stamp duty and land tax collection, enabling much of Andrews' infrastructure spending. However, shortly following his re-election in 2018, this source of revenue actually began to run dry as the property market cooled. So Pallas's budgets began to unwind at this time, also due to some of the cost overruns on the major projects. As of December 2021, the Andrews government has both failed to commit to reducing stamp duty and land tax, while also introducing two new policies designed to squeeze more money out of the property sector and expose the state government to more projected upsides for property values. So for a little bit of background, stamp duty is a tax payable upon purchase of a home. So not selling, just purchasing, and concessions may apply if the house is new, or particularly if you're buying your first house as an owner-occupier. Despite this, Victoria has some of the highest stamp duty rates in the country. For example, an average house in Melbourne is now worth about $1 million, and that would incur a stamp duty fee of $55,000 payable upfront as part of your deposit, effectively. Land tax, on the other hand, is paid by owners of a second property, so like a holiday house or an investment property, on a yearly basis. Again, based on that estimated land value in Melbourne of an average of $1 million, your tax bill for land tax would come to about $3,000 every year. So, as we can see, the Victorian government stands to benefit from continuing rises in property values, given their tax revenue increases along with it. As alluded to in my previous videos, they are not the only branch of government that encourages price growth within the property sector. The federal government has previously introduced measures to stimulate the national property market based on the RBA's belief that the wealth effect of people seeing equity in their homes increase would lead to greater economic activity and expenditure. However, the reality is that it creates two classes of people, those with and those without. And the more these policies are pursued, the wider the gap between these classes becomes. Victoria is a state in fiscal crisis. The total state deficit is projected to hit over $150 billion by 2024, and this would represent a tripling of the debt to gross state product ratio from the 2019-20 budget. As a result, Moody's downgraded Victoria's credit rating in late 2020, and with interest rates more likely to move up in the future months and years rather than down, the cost of servicing Victoria's debt comes into focus. That cost is projected to increase to 5.6% of government revenue in 3 or 4 years' time. Now, I can't confirm if a rise in interest rates was factored into this projection, but given the position of the RBA, I doubt it. So ultimately, the burden could end up being a lot more than that. In recent months, the Andrews government has introduced two new measures that have caught my attention: the Home Buyer Fund and the Wobble Gains Tax. This policy is a $500 million fund that is going to be used to top up the home deposits of home buyers, in exchange for the government owning a share of the equity in the house. That's right, the government can own a share of up to 25% of the equity in your home if you decide to access this scheme, which you can do with as little as a 5% deposit on your own behalf. Over time, you can choose to buy out the equity from the government or split the proceeds with them on the sale of the house. For mine, this opens up two alarming questions. 1. If the government has a share of the equity in your house, does that have implications for alterations you wish to make to the property? Will you lose autonomy over the property amidst the keenness of government to maximise their revenue through this scheme? And 2, will the government become even more incentivised to protect property values at the expense of the wider economy due to the conflict of interest that may develop if millions or even billions of dollars of equity are at stake? At a federal level and in terms of the RBA, will this incentivise more artificially low interest rates and deposit schemes in order to maintain high state government revenue from the property sector? The other recently introduced measure is the Windfall Gains Tax, which very recently passed the upper house with the support of the same 3 crossbenchers who have become infamous for their support of the recently tabled pandemic legislation, arguing that the tax will target the wealthy and greedy developers who make significant profits when land values rise suddenly due to rezoning decisions made by bureaucrats. On the surface, this sounds good. It will surely allow communities and other stakeholders to share in the profits of the sale of rezoned land. However, like in all such examples, the true cost of the tax will not be borne by the developers, but much more likely by the home buyers, both directly through an increase in lot prices and indirectly by a potential shortage of supply of houses if new developments become unviable or less profitable due to the tax implications. Not only this, but it potentially opens up avenues of corruption related to rezoning decisions, a problem that's already been experienced by several local councils, particularly the city of Casey in 2017. It is, after all, often the fault of local and state planning rules that land availability is restricted and land prices rise. You wonder if it is healthy for state governments to now be incentivised to create windfall gains through the rezoning process. At a time when the macroeconomic picture looks fairly bleak for various asset classes, particularly housing in Australia given the obvious need to tackle inflation with interest rate rises and the overexposure to large amounts of mortgage debt that many Australians have, it would seem prudent for state governments to perhaps look at other sources of income and revenue, one would think. But in Victoria under Daniel Andrews, naturally we expect the opposite of sense. After running an extraordinarily smooth first term of government with highly lucrative revenue streams funding his expansive and massively popular agenda, Daniel Andrews has now unfortunately doubled down on his policy of riding the housing gravy train. As a result, the state government of the day will be incentivised to continue to distort the property market in favour of investors and away from renters and the have-nots class. This of course also leaves the government very vulnerable to a collapse of prices if an event or factor outside of their control wreaks havoc. Thanks for watching.